Caught in, help! What is it, Handler? It's the Admiral! I've been convinced for months that he might be a monster. Yes, I know. Get with the program. Yes, well, for the longest time I thought he might be a Rajang, but he doesn't have a tail. Right, so that threw me off. But then I remembered, what happens to a Rajang without their tail? Oh my God. And what would a furious Rajang look like that had managed to learn to control its anger? Oh my God! Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, as we grow closer and closer day by day, hour by hour, to the release of our newly recreated variant monsters in the form of a new Furious Rajang and new Raging Brachydios, there seems like no better time to reflect on the variants and the variant system as a whole. And this time in particular, I'd like to focus on something integral to the monster hunting experience: difficulty. So today I'll be going over my list of the top 5 hardest variants in Monster Hunter, with the caveat being that I am not including the newer versions of the new variants, as they have not released yet, and I personally have avoided seeing the majority of their fights as well, so my inclusion or lack thereof of these two on this list will be entirely based on their old game fights, and unaffected by the changes, especially considering from what I've heard they would likely be sitting at number 1 and number 2 on this list anyways, with all of the boasts they've gotten. So without further ado, let's begin with
number 5.
The Iceman Cometh.
Shrieking Legiana.
Yes, I know, I'm weird and probably wrong, but this is a list of opinions, and this is probably the least popular one I have. Shrieking Legiana is a bit of an asshole, always up in the air like Kashala, or even possibly more often than Kashala, but far more agile, so he's always darting back and forth across the zone, just nearly impossible to keep up with, and if you have a weapon without much reach, or your temporal or rocksteady mantle is on cooldown, you can more or less forget attacking him in this state. Honestly, maybe my feelings about him are just an extension of the change to flash bombs, as I did start my monster hunting experience in World, where flying monsters could be taken out of the air every time they went up, unless it was tempered, in which case 4 good flashes was still enough to beat a good portion of the life out of a particularly annoying airborne foe. However, Iceborne has sort of neutered that ability, so now we have to live in fear of those above us.
They can fly?
And then there is also the explicably explicit use of the ice element, which causes the ice debuff, which personally I find to be the hardest to deal with. Like, sure, nullberries and such, but you could say the same about any blights really, and this one affects your movement and dodging ability to a massive degree. So I just consider ice debuff to actively make fights harder, really. In fact, the only thing taken away from the difficulty is Shrieking Legiana's squishiness, as just like regular Legiana, Shrieking is quite squishy and killable in a relatively short period of time. So as annoying and hard as I find him, at least it is only for a short time, which is the main reason that I've slotted this bad boy down at number 5.
Number 4.
Oh, yeah. Is that letter?
Chaotic Gore Magala.
And if I'm being completely honest, part of this might be my bias of not being all that comfortable with the base monsters that form this, as I've only ever fought Gore and Shagaru a handful of times each, but Chaotic Gore Magala is a bit of a different beast, if for no other reason than his sheer size, and by association, the sheer size of his projectiles. I mean, he takes up most of the screen when he is anywhere close to you, which you'd think might slow him down a little bit, but no! This mother hunter is fast as all hell! He's got the best of both worlds, which really is just him in a nutshell, isn't it? Or I guess the worst, depending on your perspective. He has all the crazy frenzy moves with some bonus new ones, of course, and the general result is a field of explosions and damaging areas that give you a debuff that asks you to actively run around and attack the monster, which would be a little bit easier if he wasn't so fast and so big, and maybe have used a little bit less area of effect attacks, but I guess at the end of the day, I consider this monster to be manageable. As much as he is difficult, yes, undeniably so, I simply consider him less difficult than the remaining monsters on the list.
Number 3.
Howitzer impact damage is really great.
Raging Brachydios.
And I cannot possibly explain how excited I am to see brand new Raging Brachydios in the new world, as the old one was just straight up my favorite variant. The thought involved in his fight and the unique nature of it all are just so incredible, and the main bit of actual difficulty comes from a relatively straightforward place too, from one specific mechanic, the anti-personnel mechanic of his slime.
Explosions!
It's the fact that you can't actively attack him without putting yourself in danger, because his slime reacts to hunter proximity and damage and slowly activates while still attached to him. This is basically the old world equivalent of when Iceborne monsters flinch and react by attacking super quickly as a counter, but if it were an entire monster. And that is on top of the already not so easy Brachydios mechanics with his widespread explosions and extra powerful blast status, and of course the shorter timer on his slime exploding and his new bigger attacks. He is also the first of the top 3 here, which I consider to be in the rankings of really actual difficult monsters, as opposed to the others who were just sort of hard compared to the other variants. Not necessarily the top hardest monsters, these ones are pretty high up there. And if all the gossip and rumors that I've heard are anything to believe in, the brand new version of Raging Brachydios that we are getting incredibly soon is, if anything, even harder. So it really should say something that even in his current state in the old world, Raging Brachy has made it this far up this list, especially when compared to all of these monsters that he is being pitted against.
Number 2.
I myself will carry you to the gates of Valhalla.
Annihilated.
You will ride eternal, shiny and chrome.
Rune Nergigante.
And this one sort of goes both ways, but I'll get to that in a moment. Sure, he has the classic Nergi effect, where if you break a patch of spikes, he falls over for a free damage period, and that immediately takes a couple rungs off of the difficulty ladder compared to some monsters, but where with regular Nergigante, that sort of felt like a crutch, something to help hunters who are struggling and something that could be completely abused by speedrunners. With Rune, it feels more like a necessity to me. Like they buffed the rest of them hard enough that the fight just wouldn't really be fair in the first place without these free knockdowns. I mean, he has classic Nergi moves that aren't too hard on their own, but then combined with all of these crazy augmentations that start to happen when he gets more metal spikes, like zipping through the zone with his wings, more flying moves to close gaps, and tons of attacks that just fire out the spikes in a crazy arc and with crazy range, which, well, you know, cause bleed. And bleed is definitely not an easy thing to deal with against a creature this mobile, because that honestly is the biggest difference between Rune Nergi and his regular counterpart. His speed and agility. He just has so much more mobility, and it makes it easier for him to pin you down. However, one thing I will say is that his difficulty fluctuates a little bit depending on his environment because of the way that his spike projectiles come out. In an area surrounded by walls and little rocks, maybe it has a little hill, his spikes will just be eaten by the terrain and not hit you too hard. However, in a wide open area where his spikes are able to fly out in whatever direction they want to get their maximum range, he is an entire other world of difficulty. And this variance in his difficulty is why he is sitting where he is. As if he was always in a flat open area, I would argue he might deserve to be bumped up a spot on this list too.
Number 1.
So that's how it is, huh? Once a thief, always a thief.
You ate yours. This is mine.
You took my only food. Now I'm gonna starve.
Savage Devilsho.
And this one feels pretty right to me. As far as things go, I mean, in the old games, Savage Devilsho was a pretty big step up from his regular counterpart, and even that is nothing compared to Iceborne Savage Devilsho, in my opinion, who basically has had steroids injected into his dragon element glands.
I have a glandular problem.
To allow him such a massively increased control of his clouds of death. I mean, these things absolutely melt through your health if you don't get out of them fast enough, and they cover massive areas too for the most part, just like, you know, his physical attacks do, because he does still have the base Devilsho attack moveset where he flings his massive body and massive arcs with ridiculous speed for his size, hitting wide areas with tiny movements. But now he also has the addition of these crazy dragon clouds, which have a tendency to stick around the battlefield long enough to let him continue to use his aforementioned aforementioned crazy physical attacks, while you have to avoid the dragon clouds on the floor too. Savage Devilsho is a whole other kind of beast in this regard, at least in my opinion, and for me, currently, he stands totally and undeniably at the top of the heap when it comes to difficult variants, though who knows if that'll still be the case in a week or two. Alright everyone, I've been Cotton Dinosaur, and this has been my list of the top 5 hardest variants in Monster Hunter. Do you agree with my choices? Which variants do you think should be here that aren't? Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. This is the brand new outro to tell you all the things that you do that we love, so let's start with something simple and say, oh, we love your eyes. When they're watching us play video games, when we make a bunch of jokes that are kinda lame, or when they gaze upon our failures as we try to kill the monsters, or important news about the Kingdom Animalia. Rage, Cotton, and Hollow are all here, talking about the things you want to hear, so if you want to be the first to hear, like and subscribe and the bell and we'll cheer. Some of you are patrons even though we are all the noobs and you're the pros. There's nothing we can do to thank you. No, really, there's nothing we could possibly do. Goodbye.